everybody, my name is Amanda and today I have a very exciting video to share with you guys because today we are once again going back to my booktube roots and I will be discussing my reading list, my university reading list again, and I made a video all about what I thought my reading list would be like, but this is more about the wrap up and my actual reviews of the books that I've read. So with that said, let's just jump into it. So the first book we read was Robinson Crusoe. While I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, it's still not a very exciting story. You have Robinson Crusoe who is stranded on an island and he is very particular with his pragmatic descriptions of the island and the little things, how he grows his crops and how he does this and does that, and it gets kind of tedious in the end. Again, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, but it's not a thriller really. The next book we did was then Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book actually. I'd never read it before, but the story is kind of well known, and you have the scientist Frankenstein who wants to create life, so he creates the creature and then the consequences of that ensue, and it's very interesting. The narrative structure in this book is what makes it so interesting, and I actually wrote my essay on the narrative, the role of the narrator in these two novels. We have this narrative structure of a frame narrative with a man called Walton, who then Frankenstein tells his story to Walton, but in that story it's also the creature telling his story to Frankenstein, which Frankenstein then tells to Walton. So it's very intricate and it's very interesting because there's so much meaning you can extract from that. So I thoroughly enjoyed this book, very lovely writing, and I must say that the book is so worth reading. It's so much better than any movie or anything that I've seen or read before. The next book we did was Jane Eyre, and I reread this, I speed read it with an audiobook, and I'm just not a big fan of this one for some reason. I know that it's such a loved book, but I just can't seem to love it that much. I just don't think that this book is very interesting, and even though there are thematic points of discussion to bring up, I still don't think that Jane is a very interesting character. I don't feel like the writing is that strong in order to make it really engaging and interesting. So I don't mind it, but definitely not one of my favourites. The next book, however, is one of my favourites, and that is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and I love this book. I think it's so good. It's one of my favourite classics of all time. There's so much to discuss. The writing is so rich and so vivid, and there's just this intricacy in the plot that really brings the story to life, and you're kept on the edge of your seat as much as you can be with a classic story, I guess. And I feel like there's so much to really unpack with this story, and I really enjoy it. And this is the second time I'm studying it, which might be why I think it's so interesting, because we're really picking it apart in a good way, and I would recommend this if you had not read it before, and I really want to read more by Dickens. Then we moved on to Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and I was not just a big fan of this novel either. I listened to it reading along with an audiobook because there's so many dialects and contractions and things in this book that just kind of makes it hard to get through without hearing the voices. And even though it's a well-known story and it's very plot driven, I just didn't think that it was that interesting. I just look back upon the reading of it as not very interesting because it didn't yield any really fruitful discussions, because everyone's just tiptoeing around the subject, being really careful with what they're saying, which is a good thing, but at the same time I think it prohibits discussion in a way. Please don't misunderstand me, but I just felt like the discussion surrounding this book didn't yield very much, and that might be why I didn't enjoy it as much. Then we moved on to Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and again, not a really big fan of this one. I had high expectations because we have a lecturer that loves Virginia Woolf so much, and she's been raving about her and her critics and just everything. But I just found this book quite pretentious and really hard to get through because it didn't really catch my interest that much, and it's really dense as well, which does not help it, which again feeds into that really a bit pretentious writing. I don't know really how to describe it. There's so many points of discussion in this book which makes it an interesting book to study, but reading it, it was really hard to just get through the book actually. You have Orlando, the main character, who in the beginning of the book is a man, and he goes about his life and wanting to be a poet, but then one night he changes gender from man to woman, and then he kind of goes through the centuries exploring gender norms. Maybe this is just a one instance and Virginia Woolf's other books are more interesting. The second to last book we did was The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon, which is a very special book, I must say, because I've never read anything quite like this. It is postmodern and it is about, I don't even know what it's about, that's the thing. Like, you have the main character Eyre, who tries to solve a mystery, and I guess this is kind of counter narrative, a counter detective story. It's a satire as well, and it comments on so many cultural things, which feeds into it being postmodern. It was really, like, it's a very thin story, but it takes you a lot of time because the sentences are like a page long, which is just mind-boggling. But it was very well written, and this is definitely one of those books that you read, you don't understand anything, but then you have a really good discussion about it, which just helps enlighten the book so much, because our seminar discussion about this book was phenomenal and it made me appreciate it a lot more. After a discussion I really enjoyed it, but while reading it I was just so confused. And the last book we did was The Translator by Leila Aboulela, and I quite enjoyed it. After reading this one was just a walk in the park language wise, because it's very straightforward, and you have Samar, who lives in Aberdeen working as a translator at a university there. Her husband died 4 years ago, I think, and then she meets Ray, who works at the university, and he is an expert on Islam, and Samar is a Muslim. It's a very interesting portrait of interracial and intercultural relationships, and also just culture clashes and different worlds colliding and that sort of thing. It is maybe a bit too sugary for my taste, but the comments she does make is very interesting, and it shows you a very different perspective on things that I have definitely not considered to the same extent before, and I enjoyed it, but just not my favourite. So again, the discussions from this book made it more interesting than actually reading it. And that was all the books that I read from my English literature course. Even though I feel like the reviews sound quite negative, I quite enjoyed all of the books and I'm glad I read them. I actually made it through all of the books this semester, and I feel like the discussions of them have been really good and have fed into me liking them more. A discussion about them yields so much more understanding of what the authors are trying to achieve. And with that said, like, after discussions I really did enjoy them a lot more than actually reading them. So I'm planning on making a wrap up of my comparative literature course books as well. That will maybe be up next week, 2 weeks, we'll see. I won't be able to film it today. So with that said, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up because that will help me out a lot. And if you enjoyed my content, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye!